this project called Seasonal Hour Clock, which I found actually because of the actual problem that I was having, which is trying to figure out how to coordinate time for people to meet who are meeting through Zoom, but are located in different places across the globe. And there are all these tools that have come out in the last few years to like align your calendars. You can use Calendly, when to meet, Doodle, all of these kinds of things. And they all have, ways that you can visualize different time zones and see where there's alignment between you and, other people who you're trying to meet. Mm-hmm. But this project, which I realized this is a small group of people who are using it and they built it for themselves, is like a really unique take on how to coordinate time for people to meet who are meeting through Zoom, but are located in different places across the globe. They've given a name for every hour of the clock that's the same across the world. So for example, UTC noon to 1 is called acorn, 1 to 2 is called gourd. And then it's the same name that you have across the planet. And so when you're talking to people, instead of saying, hey, can we meet at like 5 p.m. Eastern time, whatever, you can say, hey, can we meet during gourd? Or can we meet during the candle hour? Or can we meet during the ice hour? I just thought it was like such a beautiful and simple solution to like a big problem that people are having right now, high dimensional and complex, and quantifying it, have a universal way of thinking about time, but also completely subjective in the sense that it's made for this community, by this community, but it has universalized time for them.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting. I mean, there's like obvious things that it signals, like the problem itself is maybe like a manifestation of some like the ways we communicate and just how frequent now it's become to just be sitting in a meeting with people all over, and that issue that you came up with. And then the solution may also signal something. The first thing that comes to mind for me is around what it is to build on top of maybe broken systems, and like that we often are stuck in whatever it is that we're, whether it be in cities, whether it be in nations, whether it be, entire histories that are just like pretty fucked up, and do you completely dismantle it, or can you build something elegant on top that fixes the problem? And it seems like a great example of like that approach.
I really like the words that are being used too. And I wonder if, so say you say, oh, I want to meet during comet hour. Would it like influence your activity or like how you think about what you're doing in that hour?
Yeah, I really like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
So if I say like mushroom time, right? That's between 4 and 5, but
we're in mushroom time between 4 and 5 p.m. But mushroom time is mushroom time anywhere on the planet. So when you say mushroom time, it refers to this specific hour. If you're talking to somebody in BC, mushroom time for them is going to be between 1 and 2 p.m. for them. So when you open this app in a different place, it knows which time.
It knows, okay.
And then you for yourself can memorize what those different hours mean. Those names are for you in that sort of location.
Yeah.
You don't need the app. The app is just like a tool for you to be able to remember these names. And localize them to your time.
Don't move. That's what it's saying.
Yeah. Don't move.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. It's not like the best solution for nomads, I guess.
Yeah, but the people who like use it are all like extremely like cosmo-local type of people, right? The community, which is just like they're extremely rooted in a location, but collaborating across the globe. So it makes sense for them.
Right. That's like a signal in itself. Just this idea of cosmo-local being like extremely rooted, yet your collaborators, if you want tribe or whatever, is extremely global.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And I guess maybe it makes the experience or the frustration of finding a time that works for everyone to meet a little bit more poetic and interesting.
Time used to be subjective before. We didn't have universal time until the railway system came about, when you needed to synchronize schedules across different locations, across different people. And this is kind of like a reversal of that in a way, because like you have this like subjective way of understanding, like it's time, a different standard of time that's created by a specific community that's like different from standards, but also it's like universalizing it also, because it's like it works across the globe. So I don't know, there's something interesting there about like the tension between being subjective and being universal. And if you look at the like the visualizations they have there, slightly different than what you actually see on the actual website. It actually has like a spinning kind of planet with like this, an indication of like what part has like solar exposure.
I'm interested in what their naming process was. Like, was there consensus on these? Like, did they have to find like, no, that's not, that doesn't feel like a mushroom o'clock at all. Right. Whatever, you know, like what are some of these? Mushroom, thunder, frost, candle, ice, blossom, ladybug, dust. Which also just like the connotations of these different names then have on your sense of that hour, which could be super weird where people are like waking up, you know, at 3 a.m. for this rare call or whatever that they have to take at that time. And they're like, it's peach time.
Right. There's actually more information here than I realized. I'm just looking at the description that they have in the code repository. So the outer numbers are local time with noon at the top and midnight at bottom, which is, we figured that out. The faint numbers inside is UTC time. And then the colorful ring outside is the seasonal name of each hour. Winter is blue, spring is green, summer is yellow, autumn is orange. And the colored pie chart in the middle shows sunset times, daylight, dusk, and night. The hour hand is the sun traveling across the sky, which makes sense. It's like
right.
Yeah.
Like back to sundial. I really like the visualization of it.
Yeah, me too. It's like really simple and like gives you a sense of place and season.
The like interesting, I guess, creative signal for me is could you start having a lot more creativity with time, like time carving, or when Sadi and I were sitting at the Rex and everything, Sadi was like, these guys are time carvers, the jazz group playing, right? Which I think is like a nice way of thinking about it. And it's like, yeah, you can carve time however you want. And like, you could almost use this then to take it a step more creative, right? Like why even use regular hours after that, you know, once you're creating a tool like this. Why not just like start making it normal to meet it?
That's actually pretty
341s and change your hours to different amounts of minutes and do things like that.
So if we were to bring in the circadian clock into this picture, right, which is very similar in terms of like how it's a circular thing and it defines different aspects of time and it's related to like carnality in the body and like how the brain and the body works and all this stuff. And it's linked to the type of work that you're doing. So if it's like, and I'll give myself as an example, like when I need to write and I need to like be really rational, that happens early in the morning and during the daytime, right? And if I need to be a little wacky and creative and I don't care about specific things and need to be a little bit more out there, it happens in the evening or at night. And there's different kinds of productivity that people are just naturally doing to. So if you could tap into this clockwork and then tap it into the clockwork of the human body, and how we naturally are, right? Because we're getting further and further away of our natural states, right? And so if we reclaim some of our natural ways of being, I think that's kind of like a way that we can take time and we can take production or the, you know, in post-industrial society or whatever, and kind of like match them together in a way to create a new tool that actually caters to our human natures.
Kind of inspires me to like tune in more to some of that, or even to just be more instinctual about durations of meetings, durations of how I'm time boxing anything, like to just be like, how long should it take me to write that page or whatever. I'll give myself 47 minutes. That feels like a 18-minute meeting that we need to have. It's like how much time is wasted just under the assumption of operating in like 15, 30, and 60-minute intervals or whatever. Like, and rarely we use 15. So it's like often we're like, okay, it'll be an hour meeting, or it's a short meeting, it's half an hour. Like, why not say like, it probably should take us 36 minutes. And like, once that's established.
I think the circadian idea is very interesting. I wonder if the way it's being framed is still to like time is external. Like this is a mistake we're making. Time isn't external. Time is internal. Time is relative to biological beings, like living beings, also to non-living beings. Like this idea that we can externalize when it's best to do something during the day. I don't think that's how time works. Like I think there are windows where there's like potential for certain things, but it depends on what your body's been doing that day and where your mind has been running. You know, so I find like being creative for me, it doesn't happen at a fixed time. It happens because I've been doing certain things, priming myself to create the kind of time where I can be creative. And so it's like, it's not external to me, it's like internal to me. And I don't know what role technology has in that. if there's much of any. I think we just don't know how to listen to ourselves, like, because we've just externalized it so much. Because I mean, the reason you externalize something is for like other people to control it more effectively, a lot of the time, at least. My preferred vision of like a calendar or clock would be one that's based on like internal ideas of time and experiences of time.
I really like this as a appropriation of the phrase prime time. And that, like, I totally agree with you about this. And that, like, that I can be most creative. And you could say that about like anything. It's like athletes performing in sport. I mean, say performance would be an example of it. Any type of performance, you generally need to prime yourself in order to do that. So priming for creativity by exposing yourself to certain things, or for sport by, eating, napping, whatever, stretching and getting ready to go. But I like that way of thinking about time. And it's interesting to think, can you fully just try to like escape the clock and the calendar and live on your own and your own prime time?
It's always prime time.
Yeah, let's ditch the clock. Let's just listen.
Think about when you were a kid and like time was so different. Like it actually moves slower. It has to do with perception and our age and how and what we're doing and what we're up to that changes how we feel and how we experience time. And even how we address it. Like we tend to allocate time in a certain way and dictate that time should be used up in these ways, right? It's very industrial in a way. You get up at whatever 7 or 8, you get ready, then you go and do your work, and you come home, you're at 5, and the kids, schooling is kind of like that too, right? The classroom itself preparing you for a workforce or type. It's just, for me, when I think about it that way, you start to see the problems with how we deal with time and how time is in a way dictated. It's an assault on people, right? And I don't want my kids to get up at a certain time and go to school. I want you to sleep in because I think that's good for you right now, right? So my ways of combating it are basically combating a system, but not everybody can have that luxury, right? But you're still almost always forced into this thing.
I like this idea of like mapping your time based on like density of like your experiences, because like, when you go somewhere new, it feels like it takes longer than it does to get back. And that's because you're mapping things. Your perception is incorporating new phenomena. You don't know how to make sense of it. That puts a strain on your body, and time elongates and becomes denser. And so you're entering like time density zones. Whereas like doing stuff at like certain kinds of tasks that you've done like over and over again, time can just like vanish because it's like you are so like acclimatized to it, and you enter like a time slippery zone or something like that. And like mapping your time at the end of the day retrospectively based on like how much you've elongated your experience or something as a way to like reflect on your experience of time for that day.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot of fun.
So there's something weird there that happens with temporality. I don't know if it's age or what. You just feel like you had more time on your hands to go exploring, and now your time is it's like this clock, right? It's I like the idea of it. It's structuring it, but at the same time, it's like it's telling us like you force fit yourself, as a human being, into these slivers, and that's who you are. There's so much more to human beings than being clockwork. Like this is the problem. Like when we're forced to behave like a clock and act like a clock and do what the clock says, then we're getting further and further away of what actually means to be human, right? It's almost like you need to free yourselves from that in order to go back to what it meant to be human. And that is a thing that was there to dream and to imagine and to create music and poetry and all this other stuff. Technologies that free us from the mundane. If you take that away because now a machine can do that for somebody, then great, because now that person's full potential can be realized. And that potential should be something like what we're good at: creativity, art, music. That's why these things came about in the first place. We were dreamers from the first stone hammer we picked up. And that's what human beings are good at, is taking that stone hammer and creating a million variations of this thing, not to be punching buttons in a thing, right? Like that's, and in a way, the clock forces us to always forget that and go back to this thing. So in a way, I'm kind of seeing it as an assault.
Just as you're listing these different activities, I was just thinking about how time exists within all of them. Like you mentioned music and poetry, and time, a different type of time, but time nonetheless is so essential to music and poetry. And there's a type of counting, and like whether, even to other arts, there's a sense of rhythm, at least. in painting, and there's a sense of like the time passing in process of like whatever, of whittling or whatever it is you might be doing, versus this other way of carving time that is like, or counting that we do, which is like more about, I guess, time as we know it, hours and wages and these other like ways that we do counting. And I'm just trying to think of it. What are the fundamental differences of these things, or how do they relate? And maybe it's one's more violent than the others. Maybe one's more imposed. I don't know. But the time that you count in writing a sonnet is actually also very strict and structured in some way. But you get to play with it and break it too.
When you separate time from something like rhythm, then you lose the human component to it, right? Like we completely made it up, even though we had, those were natural, like the way you talked about, Robert, for me is like natural media.
Yeah.
Natural forms of media are those things. And the other stuff is almost like constructed media, right? That we use to kind of, make, like we just use it for other purposes, right?
It's interesting. It's like making me think the violence of the Google Calendar or something. Like, why can't we be more artistic about the rhythms or whatever and structure them in different types of intervals or whatever than we do? But it's very ingrained for like not necessarily very good reasons. Signal to noise, Macy.
More a prompt than a signal, and kind of rallying interest in dismantling ingrained external systems and embracing subjective perceptions of time. And I'm also interested in like looking at different ways to map experience with time, as Albus is saying, and thinking about how to visualize our subjective experience.
It is signal to noise.
I actually kind of agree with Macy. I think it's more for prompt than a signal.
Sadi, what do you think?
It's prompted a lot of speculation, which is great. And you could take this thing and bifurcate that and create a whole bunch of really interesting things, right? I think it's almost like the first stab or an instantiation of something, that's going in the right direction. But at the same time, it doesn't speak of that cultural aspect about how do we take this tool and make it more human in terms of like its ability to, bring us back to where we're supposed to be, instead of just being another tool to insert us into where we belong on the scale, on the machine.
It's cool. Valdez, signal, noise.
I think I agreed with like a lot of the stuff in the way Macy framed it in particular. And the only thing I would add is that I guess like if we just think of it as like a signal, meaning like some glimpse of a future, like maybe you could read it, I don't know if cosmolocal is the right word, but just like forms of collaboration across physically distributed locations taking place like synchronously, and these kinds of organizations I think will be much more common, and this kind of a device feels like it could come from a future where that's a lot more common. So I could see that being a kind of a signal. But yeah, I think it's more interesting to talk about how you can use it as a tool to launch you in different speculative directions.
Yeah, I like that. For me, it's just a signal pretending the 13-minute and 68-minute meetings that I'll be booking with everyone next week. And also, I think for the same reasons everyone's talking about. I like the idea that it's a signal as a prompt, or a signal that they'll have more of this kind of inventive thinking about time and less accepting of the violence of the calendar, of the Google Cal. Sadi, what's your weakest signal?